Okay, so let's start because the hour is short. Welcome everybody. Welcome to the roundtable discussion on climate change in the Middle East, water, conflict and solutions. My name is Vanessa Lambrecht and I will be co-hosting this event together with my colleague Silva van Rosse. This event has two organizers. The Greater Middle East Platform is a platform of Dutch, Middle East and North Africa experts in the Netherlands. And one of its current projects is called Green MENA. And it aims to make green partnerships central in foreign policy and foreign aid. And the other organizer is ZemZem, the Dutch language semi-academic journal from the Netherlands that appears twice a year. ZemZem strives to offer information and points of view on the Middle East, North Africa and Islam that are not found in regular Dutch media. And in addition, ZemZem offers researchers in the Netherlands and Belgium a platform to present their current and recently completed research. The next issue of ZemZem will focus on the consequences of climate change for the MENA region, and it will feature articles of the most pressing problems and their political consequences. And the issue will also look at possible solutions, paying special attention to local initiatives in Morocco, Oman, Qatar, and Egypt. And the report of this roundtable will also be published in the next ZemZem, as well as on the website of the Greater Middle East Platform. So we're very happy that you're here and also very happy with our guests. The climate change and environmental challenges in the MENA region are among the key issues shaping the future of the region and Europe's relationship with the MENA. Issues such as water management and pollution are directly related to a lack of economic prospects and conflict. And we want to learn more about what is needed, but also we want to learn from what is already happening in the region and to combat climate change and to bring positive climate impact. This afternoon, we will talk with three experts in the field of climate in the Middle East. We have Louise van Schaik. She's head of the unit EU and Global Affairs at the Klingendael Institute. And she also coordinates Klingendael research in the field of climate change and sustainable development in the Planetary Security Initiative. In her research, she has extensively analyzed the EU performance in multilateral bodies, including in the field of climate change, health and food standards. Our second guest is Karim Elgendy. He's a sustainability consultant and architect based in London with extensive experience practicing design and sustainability in the United Kingdom, the United States, the Middle East and North Africa. Over the past 2 decades, he has helped create sustainable buildings and urban environments across the 4 continents. His research interests include developing sustainable and resilient cities. Karim is also the founder and coordinator of Carboon, an advocacy initiative promoting sustainability in Middle Eastern cities, and he edits its online publication, the Carboon Journal. Last but definitely not least is Aziza Munir. She has been a visiting scholar at Nordic Africa Institute in Uppsala, Sweden. She has a PhD in environmental politics. She's a chair of environmental policy and forest at Albert Ludwig University in Freiburg, Germany, and she's now at the American University in Cairo. Aziza recently published a paper called Rethinking the Response to Climate Change Threats in the Mediterranean, Lessons from the Coronavirus Emergency. Thank you all. Thank you, Louise, Aziza, and Karim for being here and participating in this roundtable discussion and making time to reflect on this very important issue. And this is exactly what we would like to ask you now, to reflect on the topic of climate change in the Middle East. And I would first like to give the floor to Karim. Karim, can you give your reflections, please? And for all the attendees, if you have a question, please use the Q&A to ask them. Karim, thank you.
Well, Thank you, Vanessa, and thanks to Josephine. Thank you both for the kind introduction, and thanks to the Great Middle Eastern Platform. I will never be able to pronounce the Dutch name for the invitation, and thanks to ZemZem as well. So before I can talk really about climate change and its impacts, I think it'd be useful for us to give some background on the existing linkages that exist today between water and conflict in the region. So I can briefly perhaps do this using some examples from the Levant and from Egypt, and that perhaps should shed some light before we discuss the potential impacts of climate change. So I would argue here that in the Levant, at least, water has been at the core of conflict over the last 70 years or so. Historically, water developments in the Levant have generally been seen as some form of a low-intensity conflict between countries that share the same river basin or the same aquifer. The high point, perhaps, of this conflict, or rather the low point, depending on your perspective, is when Israel diverted most of the water from the lower Jordan towards its coastal population centers via what's known as the Israeli national carrier. And later on, it occupied the Golan Heights, ensuring its control of two of the three primary tributaries for the upper Jordan. And in doing so, had cut out Jordan, Syria, and the Palestinians from all of the River Jordan's water, except for the Yarmouk further downstream. And that was quite a watershed moment for its neighbors. It was such a momentous event that the Palestinian Liberation Organization then carried out its first attack, brought it to the international scale against that very national water carrier. The next decade saw Israel bombing Syrian and water projects, occupying southern Lebanon, and thus ensuring its control over the third tributary of the upper Jordan. Had also warned, in doing so, has warned its neighbors not to use any more water than it expects them to do so. And as recently as 2002, well after Israeli withdrawal from Lebanon, tensions continued to rise. In 2002, when Lebanon considered putting some pumping stations, there was Zani Springs, for example. Zani Springs is one of the sources of the Hasbani tributary, one of the three sources, which itself is one of the three sources for the upper Jordan. In the Nile Basin, in the last 10 years, we have seen rising tensions year after year between Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia in response to Ethiopia's construction of a major dam on the Blue Nile tributary. The new dam is called the Renaissance Dam, and it's expected, depending on the speed of filling of its reservoir, to cut water availability by up to 50% if filled within 5 years or less. And in this case, the threat of conflict has been used quite repeatedly, and the discourse has oscillated quite rapidly between either threats of conflict or more conciliatory messages. In addition, we've also have the existing, they never went away, the tensions between the upstream Turkey and downstream Iraq and Syria along the Tigris and the Euphrates basins. More recently in the Levant, we've also seen some changes on the Syrian side. Some land use changes in the southern Syrian territory have caused an increase in water use, more agriculture, and as a result, less water flowing into the Yarmouk River, which is shared with Jordan. More dams were constructed against the existing agreements, but the situation doesn't really allow for the resolution of such disputes at the moment. And in this context, the impacts of climate change are quite relevant. The region is actually quite unique in terms of its climate change impacts. Globally, we're expecting more higher temperatures, higher average temperatures, higher maximum temperatures, and we're also expecting more humidity. There's more evaporation going on from the oceans, and more precipitation. But in the Middle East, not necessarily Middle East, but around the Mediterranean basins, and the East Mediterranean and the South Mediterranean, we're expecting drier rather than wetter conditions, which is quite a unique phenomenon. This will be more pronounced in the South and East Mediterranean than it is in the northern side of the Mediterranean, perhaps with the exception of Turkey. So as a result, we're expecting in these two regions, the South and East Mediterranean, which is most of the Middle East and North Africa with the exception of the Arabian Peninsula, we're expecting reduction in precipitation, we're expecting an increase in temperature above the global average. It's expected that we have already reached 1.2 degrees warming above industrial averages today around the Mediterranean. We're expecting more droughts, We're expecting an increase in variability of rainfall, and we're expecting less aquifer recharge. And aquifer recharge is quite an important buffer for water resources in this arid region. But given that tensions and the risk of the conflict already exist, and the water is already part of it, the role of climate change impacts here, in my view, would be to create conditions that exacerbate existing tensions and increase the socioeconomic pressures, rather than a primary driver of conflict in and of its own right. Thank you.
Thank you, Karim. That's a very good background view also of what is happening currently. Can I ask you, Aziza, to give your reflections?
Okay, thank you once more for the kind introduction, and it's my pleasure being here today. I would like to build on what Karim said. I would like to explain why the MENA region is so vulnerable to climate change, and I would like to give some basic facts about the climate change in the MENA region and the possible implication for this in the future. Actually, the MENA region was identified by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is a hotspot for climate change, and according to the World Bank, the region is home to 6% of the world's population, but only 1% of the world's freshwater resources, with 17 countries in the region falling below the water poverty line set by the United Nations. Given the expected severe and intense droughts coupled with sea level rise and reduction in rainfall, particularly in countries such as north of Morocco, Algeria, Libya, Egypt, and Tunisia, between 50 and 350 million people in the region will experience increases in water stress or water shortage. In addition, climate change, jointly with other drivers such as population growth, urbanization, and economic changes, will cause crop failures and consequently large-scale disruption of crops in the MENA region. For example, I would like to give you a concrete example. In Egypt, water supply per capita has dropped 60% since 1970, and by 2025, the UN expects Egypt to face absolute water scarcity with 100 million people exposed in the region. Furthermore, the difficulties and costs of securing sources of sufficient waters are a challenge for the growth and diversification of the MENA stagnant economies. For example, the World Economic Forum 2015 Global Risks Perception Surveys indicated that the water crisis is the most likely risk to the MENA businesses and economies over the next 10 years, alongside unemployment and ahead of social instability and failures in governance. Moreover, according to the World Bank, by 2050, MENA is expected to have the greatest economic losses from climate-related water scarcity as share of GDP between 6% and 14%, depending on the underlying economic and climate trajectories that are going to happen in the region. The agriculture sector in particular, of which 70% is rain-fed in the Arab region or in the MENA region, is highly exposed to changing climate condition. This of critical importance, as the agriculture sector is the largest employer in many Arab countries and contributing significantly to national economies. Impacts will be high in a 2-degree, as annual water discharge are already critically low, is projected to drop by another 15 to 45%, which is a huge percentage. Therefore, I can summarize saying that by placing additional pressure on already scarce resources in the arid environment in the MENA region or in the MENA countries, and reinforcing pre-existing threats as food insecurity, poverty, water stress or water shortage, social conflicts, and political instability, climate change might act as a threat multiplier to the existing threats in the region. And actually, the EU was one of the leading organization or the leading actor to admit or to acknowledge climate change as a threat multiplier, and to organize certain international or aids in order to combat climate change, not only in the EU, but also in the neighboring countries in the MENA region.
Thank you, Aziza. Thank you so much. Louise.
Yes, thank you also on my behalf for inviting me, and also because this is a really important topic also for the Planetary Security Initiative project that we run at the Klingenau Institute, and where we have a lot of expertise specifically on Iraq, but also on the Nile Basin and other parts of the Middle East. So it's clear already from the introductions by Karim and by Aziza that water is a very political and sensitive topic in the Middle East region, and probably much more so than in other parts of the world. And if you compare the water available for the average persons living in Jordan or Iraq or possibly also Egypt, then it's way less than, for instance, here in the Netherlands or in other parts of the world, and it's inherently, you know, difficult and also a source of tension and conflict. There is much more competition among groups in society, among countries over water, and there's many examples of also terrorist groups like IS having used access to fresh water strategically for recruitment purposes, and also of how, let's say, power and water are related in the region. That being said, it is still perhaps less sensitive than some other topics, and also there is potential in the water agenda also for cooperation. And this is actually what I wanted to focus on, and especially with regards to the issue of climate change. So Aziza has already pointed out that how, and also Karim, how climate change affects the region, that it's becoming drier, that temperatures become uninhabitable in some parts in the summer. And there's a lot of focus, let's say, on how this is a common challenge across the whole region. And I think that also means that that realization that climate change is a common challenge to all is that for once you have a common enemy in this region. So it's not, you know, regions or countries or groups against each other, but the whole region is facing basically this challenge. So it means also that you could possibly use it as a kind of entry point again for dialogue and possibly, hopefully, you know, some cooperation. And we see already some examples where behind the scenes or openly there is some discussions about shared waters, for instance. There is a few, you know, initiatives, but let's say in the context of the Planetary Security Initiative and in the work we see, let's say that there is way more potential to consider how dialogue over natural resource distribution and management, efforts to do climate adaptation mitigation could be used also for new dialogues and cooperation among countries, among groups in society. So I think that was the first point I really wanted to make. So consider how you can also use this agenda, and not only, let's see climate change impact the region as a kind of act of God or something that's a fait accompli that's going to happen in any case, but also consider what you can do about it in terms of climate adaptation, building resilience, access to renewables, and how you can kind of turn the agenda around and create a perhaps possibilities and a peace dividend about this agenda. So, and then I also think about examples that are already in place, such as EcoPeace Middle East and other efforts. We also work now more with civil society groups in Iraq, and there have also been efforts in the past to create more renewables in North Africa. Some of that has also failed. I don't think we have been open enough about drawing lessons from these efforts. But these ideas keep popping up, and of course it makes a lot of sense if you look at the world map and where the sun is, and also the dust and the land restoration efforts. I guess where should people become more aware? Well, civil society, of course, across the Middle East region. But I think there's also still a lot of need to invest more, for instance, with the security sector across the region, which is realizing that water can be a power tool, using water as a weapon, but is perhaps not yet also considering how it could contribute to peace building efforts and stability efforts. And I guess that's where we can still have, let's say, a world to gain. In Europe, you see now with military organizations and the defense sector that there is an increased realization of the link between climate and security, about their own need to contribute to decarbonization effort. It's slowly emerging. We have done some research, for instance, in Jordan, where the military is super good in dealing with scarce water. But I don't see really, let's say, the issue of climate change and how it affects the security situation and how it could also have positive benefits in the security sector across the region. And I also see a general feeling of uneasiness with people who are interested in environmental issues and this region to connect it to security, also because then possibly these hard security forces would come in and they are not usually considered, you know, constructive for the peace and security efforts. And I understand this reaction, but I think if you want to address this issue, then also that segment of society probably has to become somehow involved. Then finally, I wanted to emphasize that I also see a lot of potential with indeed the European Union. Aziza was already referring to it. 30% of the EU budget for 2021-2027 has to be spent on climate change. The funding tools of the EU need to be integrated. There is new work on climate and energy diplomacy related to the European Green Deal. So I think also in that respect, there is a lot of potential to see how climate mitigation and adaptation investments can be used also for the neighborhood countries of the EU, the MENA region, linked to combating desertification efforts, shared water projects, irrigation, climate smart agriculture, heat projects in big cities, and also to see if you can make a link with indeed the peace building processes, stability objectives, and also, let's be honest about it, migration objectives of the EU, which I sometimes see hidden in these kind of projects, also play a role. So that might be also something that we would like to discuss later. Yeah. All right, I leave it here. Just a few thoughts and also maybe some dilemmas to be put on the table.
Well, thank you very much for these opening introductions. And what strikes me as a listener, not an expert in this, just like an interested person, what I always find hard is how to make this concrete. It's very easy to speak about these topics in very broad lines, policy lines. Often when you talk about conflict, especially when it's about these big river conflicts, then it's national issues. Of course, climate change impact also comes closer to citizens. I would be interested to know if you could tell us some examples of things that are really happening in people's lives directly, maybe just to make it a bit more concrete, rather than the big geopolitical or geographical descriptions that we often hear about. And maybe to start with Karim, because I know that you are an expert in urban development, and maybe you could make this sort of describe what this means in a city, because the Middle East has huge cities. I think many people don't know that, but some of the biggest cities in the world are in the Middle East. So how does climate impact work there, and how does it lead to conflict?
Okay, there are two questions there. I'll have to question the premise of the second question first, because I think climate change is likely to become a multiplier of resource scarcity, maybe a factor contributing to increasing social and economic fragility. but not necessarily an element that would directly lead to conflict as such. I don't think it would be a sole driver of anything like armed conflict in the traditional sense at all. I also think there's some scholarly debates around the subject of environmental changes leading to conflict. There are scholars who dismiss this as environmental determinism, and others who think this is a secondary factor. Climate change altogether is a secondary factor to existing challenges facing the region. They see the challenges within the region as being an even more existential threat. So on that front, I think the second question is a little bit difficult. Now, with regards to cities, there's no shortage of challenges, and there's no shortage of actions either. And I could talk for quite a long time about what challenges they're going through in terms of climate change and what needs to be done about them. So stop me when you think I've exceeded my time. Cities basically, you could divide them up into two groups. Or the inland cities will face more increase in temperature, so there are issues to do with heat stress. Cities are coastal ones, and remember that the region is mostly coastal, because on the coast you'll get more trade because of ports, and you'll also get a little bit more moderation of the temperature, which can allow biocapacity to emerge, and also allows for a more comfortable thermal comfort, a more acceptable thermal comfort rather. So in the inland we have a bigger challenge, and along the Gulf Coast we have the issues that I think Louise has alluded to, which was that study by the MIT a few years ago that suggested that the wet bulb temperature will exceed the ability of human body to moderate it. In other words, there will be hours every year when it's fatal to be outside for 6 hours. So these are the kind of the background issues when it comes to temperature increases. When it comes to precipitation, that means less food. That means the need to import more food from overseas, which will probably impact national budgets and local budgets because of the increased cost of importation of food. Also increase the environmental footprint of doing so as well. So there's that as an additional impact. But remember that the cities of this region already have resource scarcity. So resource scarcity, cities actually emerged in those very few places where they can emerge. Yes, they have, due to trade surpluses and globalization, they've been able to import things that made the cities grow, that made the conditions favorable enough for you to have a 20 million person city. That was only a byproduct of the changes in international dynamics. The global hinterland has become one. We could import air conditioning and desalination. We can import virtual water. We can import water from other countries. And as a result of that, masked the environmental conditions, the basic environmental conditions of cities of the region, which is very little water, very little biocapacity, and a harsh climate. So cities are already in a precarious situation, but the region is also quite urban, which is a plus, because urbanization, all the urbanists would agree, is a good thing. It's the best and the most efficient form of human habitation. It uses the least amount of resources, and it should be encouraged. And the region is continuously urbanizing and has continued to do so since the 19th century, and even more rapidly since the 20th century. And then 2/3 of people in the region live in cities anyways today, and that figure is expected to grow to 3/4, I think, by mid-century. So on the face of it, this is good. Cities are going to urbanize. The countries of the MENA region are going to urbanize, and that means more efficient resource consumption. There are other challenges that are preventing this from happening, but the way to fix this is to steer that direction of urbanization, and steer that direction of city growth in a way that is sustainable and also resilient. Sustainable and resilient here mean mitigate climate change and adapt to climate change in very simplistic terms, although they're not equal. But you could argue that for simplification terms, for simplification reasons, the application of climate mitigation as well as other environmental measures, sustainability or urban sustainability would be the thing to do, and urban resilience would be the thing to do to adapt to climate change and also other environmental impacts that would happen over the coming years and decades. So from that perspective, cities need to do that transition and to do these two things together. Cities cannot assume that they could just do sustainability and no shocks or stresses are going to happen and be fine. We could just go on for a steady state. That's not going to happen in the Middle East and North Africa. There's plenty of reasons why that's impossible. And cities cannot just do resilience for climate change because bouncing back or restoring the city functionality is basically restoring city functionality to an unsustainable state.
May I just interrupt you, Karim? Sorry, it's very interesting, and I love to hear more about this. But I have a question when you, and then I'm going to move to another speaker. Let's ask Aziza for this. But it connects to what you've been saying. If you say that it's important to steer the direction in the right way, that things are becoming in a more climate friendly or sustainable manner, who are the people or the actors that can do that, and who are doing that already? Is it at which level of society is that happening, or should that happen to be effective? Aziza, would you have any idea about that?
Yes, just I would like to add a follow-up comment about what Karim said, that there is the scholarship usually tends to dismiss or discredit climate change as a threat in the MENA region. However, there are increasing scholarship, particularly Western thinkers or Western scholars who portray climate change as a cause for conflicts or a trigger for conflicts. One big example is what happened in Syria, and I would like to give some concrete examples and explain these people or this researcher point of view. Just a second. Yes. For example, according to 2013 study by John Waterbury, the political economy of climate change in the Arab region, drought that happened prior to 2011 led to the destruction of agricultural land, in which at least 800,000 people depended in eastern Syria, and resulted in the deaths of at least 80% of their livestock. This in turn led to the displacement of the inhabitants of the rural areas, who went to seek employment in Syria's larger city, where they formed disenfranchised belts of disparate local communities surrounding Hama, Homs, and Daraa, and the unfair distribution of water resources in these small cities in Syria led to the eruption of the administration, and the violent reaction of the armed forces or the government led to the widespread revolution or widespread protests in Syria. So this one concrete example of how climate change could be indirect cause for conflicts or upheaval, political upheaval in the MENA region. Answering your question about the actors who can handle or address the climate change, of course, we have main actors, including the governments in the region, and also the NGOs, the international community, with strong and prominent role of the EU. However, I would like also to stress that in the wake of the Arab Revolution and the Arab Spring that flared up the region, environmental issues came to the forefront of the public sphere, and people like lay citizens became more and more aware of their environmental rights and the importance of environmental justice. I would like to give you concrete examples of some environmental campaigns that took place in the wake of the Arab Spring, that underlies the increasing role of both the civil society and the public in addressing their environmental demands, and saying that they need to have a say in the decision making regarding environmental issues in the MENA region countries. One concrete example is the Egyptian against coal campaigns that took place in 2014, protesting the Egyptian government decision to import coal and to reintroduce coal as an energy source in the cement factories in Egypt, like Lafarge cement factories. And also there is another campaign called No for Shale Gas or No for Fracking in Algeria. This campaign happened in the Algerian desert, where like the climate change is heavily impacting the way of life of the people, and where there is like shortage of water resources already. The campaign happened in the wake of the French government permission to the French company Total to explore or look for shale gas in the Algerian desert. And there was a huge campaign that challenges the decision and managed to install to stop the exploration or the fracking process in the desert. There are like many examples of how the environmental issues came to the forefront of the public sphere, and lay citizens and civil society are playing more important and vital role in claiming their environmental rights and ensuring that they must have a say in making decisions not only regarding economic meeting their economic needs, but also ensuring that they have like a high quality of life and that they have a say in regarding their how they perceive and how they would like to relate to nature. I hope this answers your question.
Yeah, sure. And then the next question is this, because you gave some very concrete examples, is this, I will now move to Louise just to have all your inputs. Is this something that you see is a growing trend, that civil society and citizens are indeed taking a stand and learning more about environmental risks or climate risks, and that they are developing opinions about it and making demands to their governments? Is that something, for example, that you see in Iraq as well?
Yes, but I guess it's also very difficult, especially in Iraq, because activists are also in a way have to be careful. What we did see that is in the protest in 2018 in Basra, that access to drinking water and also electricity, I mean, this is the region of Iraq where the oil is produced, but still electricity fallouts are regularly taking place, and also in the summer when temperature is so high that you need air conditioning. So this really added, let's say, to the frustrations of people. But of course, I also would like to emphasize this. It's true that it's not, let's say, only climate change or that's leading to these protests. It's also, yeah, inherent, you know, corruption, bad governance, and that's always in the mix. So if you allow me just a few words about Syria, I mean, that has been a deeply contested case among conflict and climate security scholars, with some pointing out that indeed the drought has led to people, farmers moving to the city in homes, and that it contributed to their angriness, and others saying, well, it's actually the bad, you know, agricultural policies of the Assad government. And if Assad afterwards also says, well, actually, yeah, it's because of climate change that the people were so angry at me, it's not me, you know, my human rights policies. And I can also understand why, let's say, conflict and security scholars are sensitive about this and dismiss, let's say, the climate change as, let's say, the reason for the conflict in Syria. And I think you also have to be careful with such statements. But I also see, let's say, that the whole debate with scholars kind of undermines the need to act and to think about how to use climate adaptation mitigation as contributors to peace and stability. And this I really find a pity, you know, this ongoing debate and this ongoing conflict among conflict scholars. I mean, this is what they are probably best at, conflict about what factors contribute to a conflict, undermines a bit the action focus, and also the putting a climate lens on conflict analysis. So including it at all in your analysis, and see how, let's say, this climate change affects the distribution of natural resources, and this is what I sometimes find a pity about, let's say, the debate on the Syria case. And similarly with how the exports of grain may or may not have influenced the protests in Tunisia at the start of the Arab Spring, you know, when the prices of staple foods in the big cities were rising because of the export ban of grain from Russia to the region. So, I mean, it's always complex. There's always many factors involved, but it should not, I think, stand in the way from now starting to act on this agenda, because I do think that the situation with regard to climate change is really alarming, and the water scarcity, water stress situation, and that it certainly adds to the grievances and tensions in the region. And by turning it around again, you know, creating it in peace building opportunities, I think that's a more promising promising agenda in the longer term. Yeah.
Okay, before we go to questions from the audience, we as EU citizens have a question to you all, in fact, because this, in a way, it's maybe, yeah, from your examples and discussion, it's already clear that the situation is different in the different parts of the, what we call the MENA region. It's a huge region with a very, yeah, diverse developments and situations. So even if from the EU we take this MENA approach, what should be the EU role in supporting local societies and governments in dealing with this droughts and climate challenges?
Mm-hmm.
And again, I would really like to not have like this theoretical policy level, but more like concrete. What can we do concretely to support this? Anybody wants to respond to that?
Okay, I can give my input about this. Actually, as I said before, the EU was one of the leading actors to admit climate change as a threat multiplier in the MENA region, given like the migration from the region due to the climate change impacts to the EU, and like talking openly, like one of the EU objectives is to address climate change is to eliminate migration from the MENA region to the EU. However, given the fact also that the EU leading like an energy transition, the main issue around fossil fuel are not dealing with scarcity, but rather ensuring a smooth transition away from fossil fuels, including managing the stability of fossil fuel producers and global markets, and how to accelerate and ensure or facilitate decarbonization efforts in order to avoid climate impacts or climate risks. Achieving such a transition is not an easy task, particularly in countries that are heavily relied on fossil fuels revenue. Also, it is very difficult to envisage how the EU will want to engage meaningfully on energy transition in its neighboring countries in the MENA region, while showing ongoing support for this fossil-dependent development model in the MENA region, for example, through the promise or the planning of new gas import infrastructure investment that might become stranded or lock in dangerous emissions. So when it comes to the EU role, there is some kind of confusion. You know, the EU is leading this huge decarbonization process. However, on the other side, the EU still finance investment in fossil fuels in like what happens in Egypt and other like MENA region countries, given the new discoveries of natural gas in the Mediterranean coast. So it's kind of very somehow confusing role, particularly when it comes to the EU.
Can I come in on this? If you're referring to the Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum, I don't think there's a chance of exporting to the EU. Recently, an EU official was asked what the EU target for gas imports, and she said it was 0. There's no capacity to import any more gas for at least the next 5 years from the EU side. So that has derailed or at least put back the idea of exporting natural gas, especially at the very high cost that will be required to build a pipeline from the East Med all the way up to Europe. I think at the moment this is a highly uncertain possibility. And I think the EU has particularly been an unhelpful partner. And for those who are interested in decarbonization, we would call it a helpful partner in that regard.
But actually, like Italy and some other like European countries still finance like the Egyptian government exploration for natural gas in the Mediterranean coast, you know.
Oh, Eni, of course. Eni was working on it, of course. So that's a private oil and gas business, and they would do that, wouldn't they? So I'm not surprised there.
Mm-hmm. But Karim, what do you expect from European governments, either together or separately?
So there are some interesting things happening on the ground today, and I think if the European expertise could step in to help those, I think that would be helpful. Obviously, every solution is quite bespoke to the region that it happens in, but there are some interesting collaborations happening. I think I should preface this by saying that there's very little collaboration happening, but at least there's some interesting large-scale developments, like the Red Sea Dead Sea conveyor, for example, which keeps getting shelved and revived and scaled down, depending on the political conditions of the day. But there are large-scale projects as such. There are similar issues to do with water security along the Nile Basin as well. And if the EU could lend some help in that, that would provide more policy coherence, if you like. Because if the EU is interested in climate change, it cannot only focus on the climate change aspect of policy without considering the wider context. The wider context is often derailing for any effort. I can give some examples. For example, from the West Bank, where the EU would provide some resilience funding, should we call it that, in the form of water tanks or photovoltaic panels to help the Palestinians who get homeless because of house demolition, build them some tents, and not long afterwards, the Israelis will come around and destroy the PV panels and destroy the water tanks. So and that will go with impunity. There would be no repercussions for the destruction of EU-funded projects. So that provides some. It undermines, if you like, the efforts of the EU. Their policies towards climate action are not consistent with their other policies that perhaps could clash with the former policies. So that's a concern. But in other successful movements, we see an interest across the region in technologies that would improve water efficiency in irrigation. For example, we see that in drip irrigation in Egypt, in Jordan, and Morocco. Although in the case of Morocco, it has led to an increase rather than a decrease in water use because people basically grew more food. We see an interest in water efficiency in buildings. That's a common thing. Is region-wide. We see an interest in technologies to waste and reuse wastewater, for example, in landscape and other activities such as recharging the aquifers. For example, in Gaza, there's an ongoing effort to do that because of the condition of the aquifer in Gaza. So there are some action on the ground that needs support. Additionally, there's ongoing efforts by CSOs. There's a new organization, alliance of climate advocates called the Climate Action Network, of 120 CSOs that are trying to come up with a unified message to lobby for more climate policies in the MENA region. They're still quite in their infancy, but the point here is any technical assistance would be, any capacity building assistance would be great to allow them to take their message further. And then generally speaking, if I'm allowed to get a little bit more technical, in the MENA region, the financial resources are quite limited. So leaving aside any financial support, a lot of the solutions that the region needs in order to deal with its climate challenges, not just because of the complexity, but because of the skewed nature of the water energy food nexus. All of the solutions that we need to come up with to address climate change need to be synergies. They could do more than one thing. They need to improve water efficiency and water security, for example. They need to, at the same time, reduce environmental footprint. And there's no shortage of these ideas, but they tend to be complex ideas. Some of them are innovative technologies that are still in their infancy, they haven't been tested yet. So any support on that front will go a long way, in my opinion.
Right. Okay, Louise. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
perhaps. Yeah, I also found it interesting to listen to you both, but perhaps to add, so you see with these council conclusions of January on the EU's climate and energy diplomacy, you see a huge shift that also, let's say, investments are now included. So and energy agreements. You also see the EIB, the European Investment Bank climate roadmap, more focus on export credit facility being in line with the Green Deal objectives. So you will, let's say there's now a whole movement on going to green. Also these financial investments, do no harm principle being included in investments. So I really think, to put it bluntly, that, let's say, the Nord Stream 2 is the last, pipeline, and also where it could be argued, this is private sector driven. So this will gradually move out, and this is also what the EU needs to do. Just like the Paris Agreement gave a big signal to the world, climate change policy is going to take place, better prepare for it, and you can be either flowing along with it, or you can ignore it for a while, but at a certain point of time it will come. And now I guess the message should also be, everything the EU will do will be mainstreamed with regard to its climate objectives. And I clearly see a movement towards this, and a lot of that will also be rolled out in the coming year. So the idea, I think, in the Middle East, that the EU will still in the future buy indeed the oil and the gas, and that you can still have cars, that you can still have non-renewable, cars, or that I think it needs to change, and therefore also there needs to be perhaps a bigger realization that indeed this transition and these renewables will be the future, and that, let's say, these new funding that becomes available through the EIB, through the EU's external action instruments, that will be climate mainstreams, because they have to, you can better prepare for that and make use of that investments towards the green sector. Of course, it's not only the EU vying for influence in this region, it's also other powers, but I think you also see it, of course, now with the new US administration. And China has domestically become way more green, and also announced that it will be carbon neutral in 2060 in the UN General Assembly. So I expect that will also slowly trickle down in its Belt and Road Initiative. We don't see it yet, but I expect at a certain point in time that is also likely to happen. But maybe I'm too positive, but I think, this realization that it's kind of unavoidable that this energy transition takes place, especially for the fossil exporting, the petrostates in the MENA region, that still has to kick in, but I think it gradually will.
Okay, yeah, Aziza, I think you wanted to say something.
Yes, just I would like to have like a very small and short comment about the experience between the EU, the cooperation between the EU and the MENA region regarding like clean energy project and so on. According to different studies, like the way the EU has been dealing with some MENA countries can be portrayed as like a Eurocentric approach, in the sense that the MENA countries frequently complain that the EU is engaged in a quick grab for large-scale clean energy projects oriented towards exporting energy to EU market, rather than a genuine partnership to maximize clean energy potential in the MENA region or in the MENA countries. I have two clear examples, which are like the Desert Tech and the Mediterranean Solar Plan project that were funded by the EU in the early 2000, and they failed in less than a decade largely because of a lack of a political will and the lack of financial visibility. This situation was back in 2000, and I know that I acknowledge that there is some kind of a positive change in the way the EU is dealing with the MENA countries, particularly given like the increasing clean energy project that such as Noor project in Morocco, and also another project in Tunisia called Noor solar project in Tunisia, which is a joint venture between Noor Energy, a British-based solar developer, and a group of Maltese and Tunisian investors, and plans to transmit electricity from the North African coast to Malta and central Italy and south of France using submarine cable by like in the coming few years. So there is a positive change, and however, the EU has to learn the lessons of the failures or the negative aspects of desert tech, and that the EU must also like measure and pay attention to the people concerned, because for example in some countries the EU tried to establish some clean energy projects, and they didn't get like the approval, or they didn't measure the attitude of the local people who refused such kind of project. Therefore the EU in the future must take into consideration not only the government policies, but also the local people acceptance and willing to collaborate in such kind of project in order to avoid being perceived as like new form of colonialism.
Yeah, we are running out of time very soon. We had a few questions, and now I'm just taking one because it adds to what you've been saying. I think we've moved a bit from water scarcity to energy transitions, because apparently there is a link to EU policies and how we deal with the region that is connected to this energy transition. So there's a question: what are the obstacles internally or externally that stand against the energy transition in the MENA, and how could the EU and or the UN add more positive input in this regard in the upcoming years? I think this is related to what Aziza has been saying, that you bring on board the local population and also mobilize the political will on the ground. Does that sort of answer the question already, Kusai? You asked it. Because we had one other question to Karim. Let me go back to that. How the new development or the new cities are affecting the growth of the existing cities in MENA, which leads to the efficient use of the resources. Is that a clear question?
It is. I think I know what it refers to.
I think it's very short because we're now already at 6 o'clock. Sorry to.
Yes, the ideal situation is smaller, denser cities, not expanding cities. Every decision needs to be measured in environmental footprint. If you build new cities on the idea that they will be more efficient, we also have to take into account the embodied carbon that goes into building the new cities themselves, not just the energy efficiency overrunning those compared to the existing cities. And generally speaking, as a rule of thumb, making new building compared to fixing the building that you already have is not the sustainable solution. And generally, we're trying to avoid using more land and allowing the nature to regenerate, rather than at least allow the land to regenerate, rather than continuing building on additional land. So that's the shortest answer I can give.
Thank you, Karim. Yeah, I think we have to leave it at that. Unfortunately, I would like to hear more of you, but yeah, maybe some other occasion. So I want to thank our speakers really for sharing all their knowledge and thoughts, and also the participants for your attention and for being here with us. We want to thank the University of Amsterdam and ZemZem for making this event possible. And then I'm taking the opportunity, Vanessa, you have prepared just 1 or 2 slides, because we want to announce that the next issue of ZemZem magazine will come out in June. For those of you who can read Dutch, if you don't have a subscription, you can order a copy, and it will be all about environmental issues and challenges in the MENA region.
You can order a copy or you can buy it in a select number of bookshops in the Netherlands and Belgium. That's one. Did you share it, Vanessa? Or
No, I'm not able to share.
Oh, you're not able to share. Okay. Okay. Then I also want to announce another event we're organizing next week. You can find it if we cannot share anything here. You can find it on our Facebook, on our Instagram, on our website. We have another event.
You should be able to share now.
Oh, great. Thank you.
We're organizing an event on resilient food stories, and we have two really amazing speakers. Vivian Tansour from Palestine, who is called the Queen of Seeds. She established an heirloom library, and we have Hanneke van Hintem, who is part of a platform that shares resilience food stories from around the world, and they have beautiful stories really to tell. So we hope you will join us next week on Wednesday for that event. You're very welcome. And with that, I want to say thank you again, and see you next time. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good
Bye.
night. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.